Hello, and thank you for joining us for another BCA webinar. My name is Vickie Matthews. I'm a Senior Vice President here at Brad Cecil & Associates, and I will be moderating a really exciting conversation today about capital campaigning during uncertain times and how we sometimes need to pivot along that route to achieve success. Joining me today is Brad, the president of our agency. This is a topic that I know that Brad is just as passionate about as I am, so thank you, Brad, for making time to join this conversation today. We're also joined by Tracy Eubanks, who's the CEO of MetroCrest Services. We have been so honored to join MetroCrest over the last almost 3 years now.
Yes.
During your capital campaign. MetroCrest does such tremendous work in their community, and it's just been a joy to be able to share in their mission along this capital campaign journey. Tracy, would you like to share a little bit about MetroCrest before we get started?
Absolutely. So MetroCrest has been around for 52 years. We had our 50th anniversary just recently. And we're helping families that are often struggling economically. We're helping with rent assistance, utility assistance, so housing stability. We're helping with food insecurity. But our objective is to help families achieve independence, to be self-sufficient. And so that includes not just the basic needs and the emergency type services, but also helping with jobs, helping go back to school with certifications, financial literacy opportunities, whatever it is that will help a family kind of get back to where they want to go. We want to help rekindle that hope that might have been lost, extinguished at some point in their life. We want to help kind of bring that back.
That's wonderful. MetroCrest Capital Campaign has been successful on a number of fronts, and so we're excited to bring some examples to our listeners today. But there's been some pivots along the way, to say the least. Capital campaigning during uncertain times is probably just the tip of the iceberg when we talk about this project. And so we want to share some good examples today about what we've learned together in the last 3 years. And our goal is for everyone who is listening today to be able to come away from this conversation with some actual real-world practical examples that you can implement in your own organization right away, because this is what we've been living and breathing for the last 3 years. So, Tracy, why don't you kind of set the stage for us and tell us what was going on at MetroCrest in 2018 and 19?
Right. And I think one of the things that's interesting for us is that we started this journey a long, long time ago. We will say that we started really looking at this 4 years ago in the 18-19 time period, but we really started this process about 20 years ago. Before I was a CEO 10 years ago, when I joined the organization, I was on the board for quite a long time, and I was on the facility task force in the early 2000s when we said, we ultimately had to find a better position for us. We were very poorly located, and we wanted to be at the epicenter of the community. And for us, in our community in Carrollton, that is at the corner of Josie and Beltline. So that was our objective 20 years ago, and of course, we really weren't in a position to pursue that then. And so 4 years ago, as we started running out of space, our offices on one side of town, or our warehouse on the other side of town, we became very inefficient. We realized we needed to start pursuing something, and so we decided at that time to look at a capital campaign, what the feasibility of that would be, how much that would cost us. We're a relatively small nonprofit, but we wanted to dream big, and that was part of the facility task force 20 years ago. So let's start dreaming big. Let's either buy a building and renovate it, or let's go look at purchasing some land and building our own building. And that's kind of the way it worked out. And we were just very busy at that time, and this is pre-pandemic when things soon changed.
Right. So what were some of your planning steps moving in? Didn't you conduct a feasibility study before?
We knew so little about this process. We had talked about this for years, but we had not been very good about cultivating major donors over the years, and so that whole process was new to us. We wrote grants, but we didn't do a lot of that. So we did hire a firm to help us with a feasibility study, to conduct that for us, to tell us what we could raise. And we started out thinking, if we could raise $6 million, that would be an absolute big success for us. And the feasibility studies show that, yes, we could raise at that time what we thought would be enough. And then from that, we had the confidence, our board supported this, that we reached out to Brad Cecil and Associates, and you guys came on board 3 years ago or more, it feels like, at this point. And during when you're doing a capital campaign during a pandemic, everything seems like it takes forever. But this actually has gone pretty smoothly overall when you look at the beginning and the end. And so we're so glad that you guys came on to make this happen for us.
Well, it was our pleasure. You guys have made our job an easy one during this process. Well, let's dig into the first topic that we want to talk about this afternoon, which is messaging. There were several points throughout this campaign that we had to pivot the messaging. Now, our core case for support, of course, had to stay the same, and it did stay true throughout this entire campaign, and that's a testament to your good planning at MetroCrest. But the call to action around that core message did change, and I remember, so we wrote the case for support, the first iteration of it, between December 2019 and February 2020. And I remember, Tracy, that we were asking you to go out and make those very first asks of your leaders, and one day you just came back and said, this feels silly. Going to these meetings, there's something big happening. We cannot continue to do this right now. So we took a break, and you very soon realized that you truly did need this new building, and we were going to have to figure out a way to make it work. So our first pivot really was to take our case for support and put a COVID impact lens on it. So can you share with our listeners a little bit about what was on your mind at that time as an agency director?
Yeah, the first thing that was on my mind was what awful timing to launch a capital campaign in February of 2020. At the time, we obviously didn't know what was going to happen in March of 2020 that really hit us in the human services sector. But we realized quickly that we needed to sideline the capital campaign for a bit and focus on what was in front of us, which was great demand within our community. Hundreds of thousands of families that were losing their homes, that didn't have food on the table. We wanted to address that. And in a sense, it helped us kind of frame everything going forward for us. You know, in the food pantry sector, you know, we're helping a couple hundred families a week, and all of a sudden we're helping 1,000 families a week. Or helping, you know, so many families with rent assistance that grew by 10 times in what we were spending. It changed the whole dynamics of what we did. We were already out of space. And now we hired 20% more people just to be able to continue to say yes when families came in. And so it was an interesting time for us. But as we looked at what do we do going forward, and I know a lot of nonprofits had to indefinitely suspend their capital campaigns, we realized it was more and more important for us to continue the capital campaign. So when we relaunched in August of 2020, this was some knowledge that we learned the hard way, the hardest way possible, but that we need to look a little bit differently at what the community needs were. That elevated level of need might be the new normal for us. That what we thought we envisioned in terms of the building might look a little bit differently. So I think we launched in August of 2020 with COVID and the pandemic influence within the case for support, that really allowed us to really push out our message in a more effective and satisfying message to those that were hearing it.
Yeah, it was a very thoughtful approach for sure. Because I remember that we had constant conversation, which was helpful for us as well. We were always talking about what were your numbers at any point in time, so that what we were saying about the capital campaign was relevant to what you all were talking about in your community. What were the needs on a 3-month basis, because they were changing so much. And eventually we got to a point where it was a new normal, and COVID was no longer the main talking point, which for us conveniently coincided with our public announcement of your capital campaign. And so that's when we really started to shift to a second message around the call to action for the case for support. So can you tell us what was going on? That would have been the fall of 2021 when we pivoted again. From August 20, when we launched, to the summer of 21 into the fall, we had learned so much. Again, I think we're all hopeful that the impact of the pandemic would be limited to a shorter period of time, that we'd be back to pre-pandemic levels in terms of demand. But we learned that wasn't the case, that our new normal was these elevated levels, and we want to make sure we could meet the needs, and that affected the design of the facility, the size of the facility that we were putting together. We had a great location. We'd purchased land in the most perfect location possible in our community, but what we were constructing
would not really meet the needs of the community based on what we had now learned. We need the flexibility built in terms of being able to deliver food in a multitude of ways. And so we knew we needed to adjust our budget as well, because construction costs were beginning to go up. We're all seeing that. The size of the building went up. We wanted design features that were showing a respect to our clients for access, meaning we wanted them to access our services in a way that was meaningful to them. And so it did just change our whole perspective. Going into November or so of 21, we kind of went public and had to pick a new budget number, which was really scary for us. Because at the time, we'd gone historically from looking at, could we do a $6 million capital campaign? Could we do a 12.7? All of that seemed crazy for us at the time, and now we're looking at 15.8. Things have just changed, and the community really responded to us.
Tracy, we'll definitely talk about the changing goal in just a minute, but your case for support through all of these changes still remain true. It's a true testament to the planning that you all put into this project. So good job, MetroCrest team, for all of that thoughtful work. But there were a lot of impacts that we all continue to deal with, especially relating to construction projects, which has led us to a new situation for your campaign where we have yet another set of messaging, which is completion messaging. We'll talk about what's influenced your budget in just a minute. But Brad, would you like to speak to this new completion phase that we're finding ourselves in?
Yeah, so what's really interesting about this campaign in particular was once we developed a case for support, and by the way, let me just add, since most of the people listening to this will be fundraisers, the case for support is still as important as ever. I know there's a lot of feedback going on in the fundraising community that states that the work that's done during the campaign is not necessary. No feasibility is required anymore. Case for support is not required anymore. But the reality is all of these things are very, very important, and this campaign that you're a part of is kind of proof of that, because we didn't have to pivot too far from the core message. What are we doing? Why are we doing it? How much is it going to cost? And then what are the outcomes when we get there? So we did a really good job. Vickie and the team did a really good job of putting together the case for support. But in the midst of it, we go from the initial goal was $12.7 million to the reality that we need to raise more. If we're going to get this project built, it's going to be 15.8 million. So that's not an easy thing to pivot from. And the reason for that is the organizations that you go to early are the ones who give according to a certain principle, and they usually use a percentage. So they look at the goal and say, all right, if we give, in fact, we have one foundation in particular that says we'll give 20% of the goal or up to 2 million, whatever comes first. They're very, very consistent with that. They don't change off of that. They, as far as we've worked with them, they've never varied from that. They just keep it as a core principle of theirs. So when we go to them, you know, we're really wanting to maximize this gift. Now, it just so happens that we did maximize a gift in that particular case, but we have other foundations that we're dealing with now that we have to introduce this new goal to. So again, the goal for them was to be completely debt-free. We don't want MetroCrest to go in there and then have to get a mortgage to then pay for this building and then do not a disastrous thing, but a difficult thing on the annual side when you're raising money for the annual budget, that it's now enormous. The sum has just doubled or whatever. So we wanted to be very careful about not doing that, in particular, not leaving them hamstrung with a huge amount of debt. So, but the time to make a change is also very important because you don't want to do this too often. So this is my advice to all the fundraisers out there. If you have a goal, make sure it's high enough to cover what you anticipate is going to be the cost. And then if you make a change, do it once. Don't do it twice, 3 times. Now, I know a lot of you have been probably part of campaigns where this is a requirement. You've had to change the goal 2 or 3 times. But you have to explain to the people you're working with that it's very difficult to move away from these goals without a lot of forethought to it. So that's my only thought is, set out to raise a goal, let people know, and then celebrate as you go along each step of the way. So again, this desire to be debt-free is something that we embrace. We said at the public phase, when we go public, let's adjust our goal to the new amount, 15.8. And even that, we find out, is not enough. So this is the difficult part. But we then have to then pivot from that at some point and say, okay, we've completed our campaign, but now we're on to another project.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think that the changing goal is probably something that a lot of our listeners want to learn more about. So let's talk about, we've now had 3 changes in our goal. Who would have thought when we started on this journey together that that's what we would have found, but we did. So we started with an initial $12.7 million goal. And as you've mentioned before, Tracy, you never even thought that that was something that you could accomplish. And here we are, having exceeded it many times over. So why don't you share with our listeners a little bit about the thinking and the planning that went into establishing that initial goal?
Right. The 12.7?
12.7, yeah.
So, really that was based on a few very basic factors at that time, because the world seemed a lot simpler at that moment. Was we'd purchased land for a certain amount. We were going to build a 35,000 square foot building versus what ended up being about 48,000 square feet. We knew where it was going to be situated. We knew how it was going to be designed. We knew who the architects were going to be, et cetera. And so it seemed relatively simple. And you guys did a great job of showing me this chart that showed me how I would get there. You convinced me it was possible to get to 12.7 by bringing in a few donors at different levels. And I think one of the things that gave me hope in terms of being able to accomplish that goal at the time was we had numerous periods over that first year or 18 months where foundations, large gifts came in that we didn't maybe expect, or they came in a little bit larger than we thought. They're like tipping points for us. They're momentum tipping points. I remember getting one in December of 2020. We just launched, and we had our first very large gift. And not only did it create some credibility for us, it also allowed us as a staff to feel that we can maybe do this after all. And we became very excited about it, very competitive about it, very motivated to stay on top of that. And so we were able to have a clear path to 12.7.
Yeah, you all are a very easily motivated group. That's one of the things that I enjoy about working with you all so much. But I do realize that this was your first capital campaign in the 50-year history of Mentor Crest Services. So we were asking you to accomplish something that you had never even thought about. Establishing a goal like this, there's a lot of unknown in that process. But who would have known that the worldwide economy, the supply chain would have just totally just been flipped on its head. That's where our strategy came in. Brad, you alluded to it earlier, that there are certain times in a campaign when if you absolutely must change a goal, you can. In the case of Mentor Crest, it was this really ideal alignment of fundraising got us to the point where we could publicly announce at the same time that they were celebrating their 50th anniversary. So can you talk a little bit about the strategy from a fundraising standpoint behind changing the goal at that specific time? Yeah,
because, and this is a very important part, because I don't think a lot of fundraisers will consider this because, again, there's some feedback going on right now in the fundraising community that says you don't need to do all this certain planning, but we feel like you do. And so we did have on our calendar the 50th anniversary. We thought about when we wanted to go public. We thought about the goals that we've established. Now, during the quiet phase, you can do quite a bit of adjusting to the campaign, but when you go public, it should be pretty solid at that point that you've thought through all of those things. And so I think we did, but it was good for the sake of our committee to really go through this and explain to them that you can't just keep going and changing goals on a whim. You have to really be thoughtful about why you're doing it. And so I thought we talked about it really seriously about when do we want to do this, how are we going to do this, when are we going to announce this. And so the timing was really crucial to what we were doing, especially when we go public on that in particular.
Yeah, absolutely. It was really ideal timing. The planets all aligned for us, for sure. Tracy, we've talked about a few of the influencers for you on changing the goal, but is there anything else that you feel would be helpful to share to some of our listeners who may be agency directors themselves?
Right.
What influenced you to really dig in and make sure that we pursued a larger goal at that point?
I think one of the things that I realized was that first, it's okay to change the goal. You don't want to be doing it on a whim, like you alluded to, but sometimes it's just best, and it's better just to accept that and begin a new strategy and how you're going to get there. We had a dream of what we wanted to put together, and we're doing it during the middle of a pandemic. A lot of uncertainty, and what we found was donors, the community as a whole, understood the uncertainty. We were all uncertain. And so the fact that we said, we're going to need to build something a little bit bigger to accommodate our community's needs, that we needed to build something a little bit better to make sure we meet the needs of the community and that people are treated with dignity and respect, that it's okay to do that. And because we had an objective of being debt-free, because we want to make sure donor funds go to help people, not to help on a mortgage, help a bank, that was a determining factor as well, because we knew to build what we wanted to build, we needed to adjust that goal.
Right. You often talk about how you just have one chance to get it right.
And I tell the team, even now, when we're kind of ramping down a bit and hoping not to spend much more money, but it is the one time for us to get it right. We won't, in a year, go back and invest in certain things just because we'll be back on focusing on programs, focusing on helping the community, not focusing on construction. So you have one time to get it right. You better do it now while everybody's really rooting for you.
Absolutely. Well, you for sure got it right, because I feel like I should have confetti or something. You did it. You reached your $15.8 million goal. I mean, it's just been such an incredible journey to see you and Metro Crest Services and your volunteers along. I mean, who would have thought when you started this process you would have 4 7-figure gifts? You've got, I think, 9 $500,000 or more gifts. We're getting close to 600 donors to this campaign. I mean, it is just tremendous to see the very intentional and good work that was put into this project.
We could not have done it without you, that's for sure.
Thank you. You're kind to say that. But our job is still not done.
No.
You, in particular, are being faced with still even more difficult decisions about the fundraising to make sure that you're debt-free. So this has led us to this completion phase that we've talked about a few times already. We've moved into this new messaging and a new kind of structure for our campaign. But again, because I know there's a lot of nonprofit partners that are listening in today, just again, what's on your mind and influencing your decision to continue to pursue this notion of being debt-free through capital campaign fundraising?
Yeah, I think one of the things that has occurred, and can happen on any project, especially one where there's supply chain issues and just a lot of uncertainty, is you get things that you just didn't anticipate at the beginning. For us, it might be the cost of technology, the cost of signage. We want to make sure the building is seen from all over the place, from every angle, and so we've added additional signage. Having to wait for the most simplest of construction materials, concrete, all kinds of things that you can't lock in the price on, and when it gets there, and it causes delays, and the materials are costing you more money, the delays are costing you more money. And so we looked at getting to 15.8, and we were celebrating. We really realized that one of our objectives, which was to be debt-free, would not be obtained without us going a little bit further. And so we've added this additional $2.2 million as a completion piece to make sure that while we still have momentum, while people are still really focused on what we're doing, while there's an opportunity for second gifts from folks and some new gifts from, we still probably have another 100 or 200 donors. I think they'll still give to us before we complete the campaign. Let's take advantage of while we still have momentum.
Right. It's an exciting time to get someone engaged in the conversation,
absolutely.
for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
So adding $2.2 million onto the end of a capital campaign leaves a lot of areas to make sure we're getting the strategy right. So Brad, can you speak a little more to what has influenced our agency's thinking on the strategy behind this completion campaign?
Sure. So initially when you set up a campaign, you always set up a solid case for support. This is the problem, this is the solution, this is how much it's going to cost, and this is what the outcomes will be once we've gotten there. Once you've done that, once you've completed that, then you realize, variables have changed in the midst of this. Now we've got some additional costs that are going to be associated with this. In particular, they're going to be associated with our service and other things. So you can, at that point, form a completion type of campaign. A smaller campaign which has different outcomes, has its own case for support, and perhaps its own structure. Now what happens at that point, though, is you open up the door to other organizations. Because the fundraisers that are listening to this will know there are a lot of organizations that don't give to capital at all. Well, okay, that's fine. This is a project that's going to need more than just capital. In other words, we're not just doing bricks and mortar in this particular case, so we're going to have to include those organizations that give to other things. Now, why are they going to give, though? Are they going to give to materials that are going to be a part of this campaign, et cetera? So you have to really work hard at this so that you don't treat it too casually. You have to listen very carefully to your funders and say, what is it that you're looking for? What can we include in our proposal to you? And so that's what happens at the completion. Then you can also go back to some of your original funders from the first campaign and ask for what we call a bookend gift. They gave at the beginning, and they might give again to another completion type of campaign, but it really is a separate task now. It's not the same thing. We've done that, now we're on to the next piece. So this is the piece that we recommend anyways, that people think about if the costs have changed. And in this particular case, I'm sure most nonprofits that are listening to this are realizing, boy, our service is heightened. It's double, maybe even triple what it was pre-pandemic. Our costs have gone up because now supplies are not what they used to be. And so it's costing us more to do the same thing that we do with the number of the new numbers or the new reality that we have there. So we have to work on this. And this is what makes it hard, because people, again, a nonprofit exec will just say, let's just go raise more. But all the fundraisers know it's not as easy as that. You have to have a really good plan to go along with it.
And I think it's an important message to hear is how you can tack on a little bit at the end of your campaign with a good reason and rationale, but with a little bit of a different structure around it. Well, our last topic for today is my favorite. It is all of the different strategies that we implemented and how we were able to find success in those at these various points in the campaign. This isn't just as simple as just writing a lot of proposals to major funders. There was a lot of nuance and a lot of really good fundraising that went into this. And Tracy, one of my favorite things that you did in this campaign is you really spent a lot of time with donor stewardship. Just because someone had given you a gift, you didn't just say, thanks, I'll see you at the grand opening. You continued to keep them up to date on what was going on in the project, and it really resulted in some exciting results for you. So can you share a little bit about that donor stewardship?
Right. So one of the things that BCA provided us early on was a monthly campaign update. And initially, I wasn't sure what to do with it. We didn't have that many donors at that time coming through. But what I realized was I needed to find a way to stay in constant contact with the folks that had given. And I used it for prospects as well, to let them know the impact their gift was having on the campaign, and to encourage them to share this with those in their groups or other contacts. And so I'd send that out every month to individuals and companies and foundations, churches, civic groups, whoever it might be, saying, attached is this great update of where we are. We've reached X% of our goal. Here's more about what's happening with the construction or wherever we are in that particular phase. Here's how other ways you can help. I'd always add a link to give, share this with your friends. And so that was an amazing tool for me because, you know, I've never thought of myself as a professional fundraiser. You know, as a CEO, I think of myself as operations, but obviously I've become somewhat of a fundraiser. And,
I would call you professional by this point, for sure.
And so, but I'm always looking for a reason to connect without pestering someone. And we are very persistent on our side, but not to be seen as a pest. So it's really a thank you opportunity every month, an opportunity to keep people engaged and to share with others. And so that tool made a huge difference. It's led over the last 3 years from folks that gave almost 3 years ago to just have given again recently these bookend gifts and these multiple gifts that we probably wouldn't have had otherwise if I just sent them on stewardship level letter and said thank you. A lot of these gifts wouldn't have come through without that particular strategy.
Yeah, and I mean, having seen you do this over the last several years, you were very thoughtful in that approach. This wasn't a simple, here's my email distro list, and I'm just blasting this out to whoever is on there. You were very thoughtful in who you wanted to reach out to and at what time, and I think that is what has led to your success. I mean, I can think of right now, off the top of my head, at least half a dozen donors that have made major commitments 2 and 3 times over because of these efforts. And so I hope that that's something that our listeners really soak in today, is that you can take one of these tools. It was very easy to prepare and update and just send it out. It takes 5 or 10 minutes and you keep that relationship going. So
it's important.
So, Brad, one of the hurdles that we tried to address throughout this campaign was access to donors. Because of MetroCrest's geographic location in our community, some of the larger professional funders just were not as accessible to them as we had hoped that they would be. So through this campaign, we used it as an excuse to reach out to them. So can you talk a little bit more about our strategy and maybe some of your favorite examples of some big wins that we had with major funders through this campaign?
Yeah, and I think part of it was just listening very carefully in the past to some of the organizations that we'd worked with to say, would this particular project be of interest to you? Now, that's a great question always to ask. Is this in your area of giving? Is this something that you want to be a part of? And so in particular, we did have, there's a foundation here in Texas that we know of that we've worked with on many occasions, and we know their interest in projects and how they want to work with our organization. So we reached out to them, and Tracy and I went down and talked to them, and they both responded, or they responded favorably to us and gave us one of our lead gifts to this particular campaign. And they did so in such a way that also encouraged us, because they could have given we encountered this yes but less on some occasions, where you ask for a gift and people say, yes, I'd like to do that, but I want to do it less than what you're asking for. But in this particular case, it was yes and more. So it was a very encouraging situation for us to engage. Actually, I think they gave us exactly what we asked for, didn't they? Yeah. So we did stretch them on that particular one, but we knew going in that they were in favor of this particular project, and we spent some time listening to them. Another organization that we had a little bit of a difficult time getting in front of, we had to use our connections on with our committee and volunteers to get that door open. And when that door came open, they actually said, we want to help you complete this campaign. So they came in at the very end. Again, they have the resources to do this. But initially, we had very little opportunity to get in front of them. And so we did work our connections through our committee and the people we know to say, could we talk to you about this particular project and completing it? So that was a big help in that particular case. And it was very encouraging to see the number of people that gave to this campaign because of the success of the campaign. In other words, they were giving because they knew that it wasn't going to, to be sitting dormant for years. They were giving because they knew this was close to being finished. So.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
One of my favorite strategies to work on with you, Tracy, has been the solicitation of the cities. So MetroCrest sits in an area where your service area actually covers 4 different cities. Right. And you had just such a wonderful idea to ask them for a major commitment. And I've always really admired the work that your agency does, not just in the capital campaign, but in general. You have built such good and strong partnerships with all of the cities and municipalities that are in your area. So can you share a little bit about that? Sure. I mean, it was such a great gift that we were able to secure.
We've been very fortunate. While I don't know that we've been great historically with major donors and major gifts, we've been very good at building relationships locally within our community. Right. And 4 of those are with our 4 suburbs that we serve, Carrollton, Farmers Branch, Addison, and Coppell. And we've had a relationship with them for 20 or 30 years. They do provide us some funding each year. And so because we have a good relationship and because we were looking for some creative ways to propel the campaign forward, and because we knew that what we did mattered to our cities, that we were providing services that they would need to provide if we weren't there, we wanted them to invest. And so what I did was I reached out to all 4 city managers and I gathered them together and they all know each other, they collaborate a bit, and so it wasn't uncommon for them to be together, and I explained what we're doing. I remember having a PowerPoint that you might have provided me with pictures of what we're doing, and told them that from the 4 of them in the aggregate, I'd like to get a $2 million gift. And they readily agreed to the degree that they could, and then within a couple months it was approved by all the city councils, and each gave a proportion based on the impact we make on their community. And it was a relatively smooth process. I think they all used general funds. ARPA funds were available, and one of them used ARPA funds for sure.
Right.
And they opened up a door of thinking for me that, okay, who else do we have a good relationship with that may have funds, such as some of the government funds that were around at that time. And that led us to a really substantial gift for the capital campaign and for operations from Dallas County. So
that's right.
Building those relationships over time benefits you in many ways. And when we started the campaign, one of the things that we did, we looked at who do we have great relationships with that we want to ultimately speak to, and the cities were on that list. We waited a little bit to make sure we had something really to show them. They wanted to see impact, and they're key partners, and we couldn't have done this without them, that's for sure.
It was wonderful to see how that all unfolded. I think that could be a whole other webinar probably of how you work with those
I do want to add too that MetroCrest is really, really good at stewardship. So stewardship is one of those ideas that I think a lot of people think that it's necessary. Well, it's nice but not necessary. And in fundraising, it really isn't that case. You have to do good stewardship, and they've done good stewardship with their cities. They've done good stewardship with the donors that are there. And so I just want to applaud you for that. I think it's been a joy working with you on that level because of your stewardship. People feel good about being a part of these projects because of the fact you're not leaving them, they're not treating them as a checkbook. You're treating them as a person who's a partner with you in this project, and you're going to realize the outcomes because of their participation. So
Good.
I want to applaud you for that.
No. We had a lot of guidance.
Well, we can all applaud you very soon when your beautiful new building is finished, and hopefully we've made all of the progress we need to in this completion campaign, and we'll be right there to celebrate with you that you're in the final stretch of this process. So that concludes our conversation for today. If you have any questions, please send them in to us at info@cecilcommunication.com. We would love to hear from you, and look forward to joining you next time when we have another BCA webinar. Thanks for joining us today.